Hey, good evening, Via, and it's great to have you joining us. And I've been looking forward to tonight. We've been talking about this for a number of weeks among our pastoral team, just wanting to be able to give you some tools and to be able to just walk through some of the challenging times that we're facing right now, not only in the U.S., but in the world. And I'm excited to have with me Dr. Raymond Branton and Dr. John Michael with Professional Counseling Associates. And they have been a part of really Via's ministry now for 8 or 9 years. And their main office is on South Alma School Road, just south of 60. And they are really partners with us in ministry. If you want to check out their website, it's PCA, Professional Counseling Associates, PCA AZ for Arizona. So PCAAZ.com. And you can go ahead and see they've got about 18 counselors that work with them. And I'm just excited to have you guys here. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And Dr. John Michael has done a few different things with us for marriage conferences and different things, I think, on some of our Sunday evenings, and spoke to our leadership before. And Raymond, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago that you and I had breakfast over near your offices, and I just said, we need a partner at Via Church to really help us to be able to pastor and come alongside people. And so often, many of you, if you're a part of Via, maybe you have found some help at PCA over the years. Oftentimes, when there's marriage difficulties, we as your pastors point you to PCA, or if you were getting married and you did your pre-marriage counseling, we've sent you to PCA. Others of you have had challenges in parenting and sometimes anxiety or depression or substance abuse or dependence. We have pointed you time and time again because these guys and their team are just able to help in incredible ways. So as a pastor, my philosophy really is that when somebody comes in to meet with me, I'm happy to meet with them. I'm happy to hear what's going on. It's usually a 911 kind of a thing. It's I have to see you, and I have to see you as soon as possible. And when I have those kinds of meetings, those meetings are what I sort of call triage. It's just helping to put a few of the pieces together and then helping them to see resources. And so oftentimes when someone comes to see me, I'm trying to say, look, we've got resources in our church. Here's some folks that can help you. I'm here to pray with you. I'm here to encourage you. But literally, we have stacks of your brochures in our office. And when I end that, that's in their hands, and we're pushing them to contact you guys. And we're not professional counselors as pastors. And my philosophy is that we shouldn't be trying to dabble in professional counseling. We can encourage, we can resource, we can help, we can walk alongside them. But you guys and your team have been such a huge help to us over the years. I just know in my own personal life, I've benefited from talking to counselors over the years, and had one particular counselor for a lot of years, and Susan and I would see him or call him, and I know in my life it's been such a huge help. And so as we think about some of the times that we're in right now, these are some challenging times. We really, for the last 3 months between COVID-19 and all the different changes and all the different communications about that, we know that people have faced job losses. People have had weddings and funerals on Zoom. We have working parents at home with kids 24/7 going on. We have seniors that really have been alone and isolated for a long time. And so help us out, like talk to us. And I know the other day I was with someone who, she cuts hair, and she said she opened her salon back up, and she said, Rick, some of these clients I've known for 15 or 20 years, and they're coming in, and I'm really worried about them. They're stressed, they're down, they're negative, their marriages are crumbling, and she just as a person that just gets to talk to people, she was concerned. And man, I said, we feel the same thing. And so talk to us a little bit about the kinds of times that we're in and the things that we should be talking about, and give us some tools.
All right. You want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, thank you for having us, by the way. We so love partnering with VIA and partnering with so many of the other churches in the area. It's important for us
So we do have that in common. We have to remember that all of us are experiencing this together. And sometimes that's one of the key components we have to remember. So we can maybe give a little bit more grace to each other as well. But really they are unprecedented times. And we're seeing that in especially the last few weeks with increased referrals.
Yeah. And when you think about that, are you feeling like anxiety's high? I know a lot of people are just saying anxiety. Some people are anxious to go out. Some people are anxious because they have to stay in. Some people are anxious that their life won't return. So just talk to us a little bit about anxiety, which oftentimes goes hand in hand with depression.
Well, we've tended to use the word anxiety as this catch-all, for everything, like you've just mentioned, and we really try to look at what's really beneath that. How do we break it down a little bit? So there's helpless in there. There's powerless. There's been a lot of change, even to the point where you get to go do something that you've always done now, and after the last 3 months, it seems novel again. Like we went to a wedding the other night, and I think the couple was really thankful they were actually be able to do the wedding at the end of May. And it was almost strange to be in the room with people, you know. And so in some ways that even was different when we were so used to it in our whole lives. So I think being more locked down has created that feeling of helplessness or powerless, and I think we can start to use that term anxiety to catch all of that. So when we see people in the office now, we have to kind of break that down a little bit and think about, when you say anxiety, what do you really mean? And so
help me know a little bit, just on a scale or maybe a definition of actual anxiety or just that helplessness. To help me to.
Well, a lot of times when we think of the term anxiety as clinicians, we think more debilitating, and it's just where there's something that you've always been able to do pretty easily, and then being really shut down and not able to do that as much. And so people use the word panic a lot too as well. So we really try to figure out if people can really push through, if it's a novel time and they just are feeling some things they just need to push through, or if they're really debilitated.
Well, let me piggyback on that real quick, because anxiety actually is something that's necessary, right? If we didn't have anxiety in our life, sometimes we wouldn't get things done, right? So we help clients when they come in. By the way, we have to apply this to our own lives too, right? But we help folks when they come in define that better, because they may be using terms that aren't helpful. Right? And we don't want certain things like anxiety or panic attacks or something like that to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So we help define the terms, like John said, break it down, understand what they're really experiencing. And if in some of those places we can help normalize some of what they're going through, sometimes that can actually decrease that experience, that sensation that they're experiencing, to a place where they can start functioning a little bit better, right? But sometimes we just need to process through that a little bit, help normalize some of this, again, realize we're going through it together. And sometimes that connection itself is the most therapeutic component.
Can you kind of break that down? Because I love the idea of normalizing, but what is, when you help people normalize that, what is that specifically, what does that look like in your conversations and in your counsel and so forth?
Well, as we've all experienced, we don't do well in isolation. We're created for relationships, right? We're created for a relationship with God. We're created for a relationship with others, right? And oftentimes we're experiencing the attributes of God through those relationships with others. So they're so vitally important, and we've all been thrown off, right? And so sometimes, to answer your question, just the knowledge that we're going through it together, right? And we create that connection is helpful. And then we can share some of our stories, we can share some of the narratives and realize the things that we have in common. All of a sudden we don't feel as alone anymore. There's lots of research and literature that says the primary change agent in a therapeutic relationship is actually or in the therapeutic process is actually the relationship between the client and the therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because really that's true in ministry, that's
Right.
true in our closest
Yep.
relationships, but we've all been thrown off. We've
Yeah.
been disconnected over the last few
Yeah,
months.
sometimes the most powerful thing is to say, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I've had that
Right.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a counselor is one, it actually literally means one that comes alongside, right? One that walks with. And so I said something a couple of weeks ago, I'll confess it to all of you that I say a lot of dumb things in sermons, but I said a dumb thing the other week, and I just said, man, I got so many things going on in my life. I thought about calling a counselor, but I couldn't think of one that wasn't going through their own stuff, and I don't think why give them more stuff?
Right.
And I remember Susan, we were watching it at home, so now she could talk to me while I'm preaching, and so she said, that was a terrible thing to say. Like, no one's going to, you basically told people don't call a counselor. But really what you just said is a beautiful thing, right? You guys are going through this as well. We were just talking about how much churches change, but your industry's changed so much and doing, really by video conference
Right.
and so much. And so we're all we are sort of in that together, aren't we? We're
Yeah.
experiencing that change. And so many of you at VIA, you've been connecting through communal readings or doing Celebrate Recovery through Zoom and youth groups through Zoom meetings. And so we are sort of all in this together experiencing, that kind of change. And talk to me just a little bit about loneliness, if you would, just sort of that isolation, that loneliness. We've had a few, we've had even a few seniors that just said, I've never been more lonely in my entire life than right now.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that when things like that change, I mean, that's what we're going to talk about a lot tonight is change. Even good change is stressful. And then to be isolated where you haven't been for a long time can really, me too. We've had to change a lot of our day, the way we operate daily. And for some of our clients and for a lot of the folks even at church, to hear yourself all day, I get tired of myself. I don't want to hear myself all day, but you can to be isolated is just the opposite of what Ray said is, we're built for relationship. And so when we have to be alone more than we have anticipated, I think we can just really start having a lot of negative thoughts and start ruminating on those things that we aren't getting to do or those things that we're missing or just start having some of those negative beliefs creep in.
So are there any practical things you could maybe just share with somebody if they're feeling lonely and they're sort of feeling that isolation?
Yes, absolutely. But part of this part of these unprecedented times is we're discovering new ways to connect because we have to. Because we have to. Like you said, it's changing industries. Yeah. We see it in the business world. It's changing the church world. Yeah. It's changing our industry, right? And so we're discovering these new technologies, these new ways to connect. But they're novel as well. So like John said, it's that piece of it might be positive, but it's still new to us.
But we also find the people that are saying that they're the most lonely, they're the ones who haven't adjusted as much or haven't forced themselves to adjust. Like when Ray said that sometimes anxiety is necessary to push through, that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
I think some of the people that we've met with that have heard about that feel the most lonely are the ones who haven't really pushed through to try new ways of connecting. So they won't go out for a walk or they won't get on the floor and stretch or just try something different to keep moving. And so I think we can really get closed in if we don't push a little bit.
And it might, maybe, this is a hypothesis, maybe it's been a little bit easier, and I say a little bit because we have teenagers in our house too, so we've seen their struggle. But maybe the younger generation is a step ahead because they're already used to the new technology where some of us, we're still learning some of this. And we've had to learn really quickly over the last few months, right?
Well, I just commend so many of our seniors at VIA that didn't even know what Zoom was, and now almost every day they're on a communal reading or prayer, or just even many of you right now watching this. I'm proud of you. You found it. You figured out where to click. You're watching this thing, and you've done that out of necessity. Just this feeling, I've got to see something. I know there's life outside of me, and so pressing through. And sometimes we spent for a while just looking at somebody's forehead, but then after a while they figured out that the camera was on them.
Looking down.
But out of that necessity, right, and sometimes out of that desperation, right, comes growth, right? So we do need stress and anxiety because that helps us grow, that helps us develop. But it's been such a shock to the system.
Well, and I'm a person. A lot of people don't like change. I love change. I say quite often I have an insatiable desire for change. I just love things that change. But a lot of the change that we've gone through has been loss. It's been. I've looked at it going, it's not good change. It was better before, and so I'm a person that loves change. Technology never scares me. I'll just wade into it and figure it out. I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. But when we think about a lot of the change that people have, people are feeling loss of graduations. I think about Andy just finished a master's degree that he's worked like crazy for, and yesterday should have been in Pasadena with the celebration, and misses that, right? My brother-in-law's wedding a couple weeks ago, we watched that, and I thought, well, this will be interesting. It's my first Zoom wedding, and I'll just have to tell you, I think a reception on Zoom is terrible. We just watched people and never really talked to them, and so there's loss in all of that for people in these moments. We've had funerals here where families are Zooming in to watch that and don't have that presence. So, just talk to us a little bit about loss through some of this.
Well, a lot of times it's walking alongside of someone and letting them know it is okay to grieve, and talking to them about the different stages and what they might want to expect when they go through the grief process. And you're right. All of us have suffered loss to some degree, some much more than others. To do that in isolation. Right. We would never have imagined some of the losses that we've had, and then how we had to then grapple with them. Right? So again, talking about the stages of loss, stages of grief, and that it is okay to grieve. And it is okay to rely on God, and it is okay to rely on a few trusted people in your innermost circle. But we have to be so intentional about making those connections with those people, because the normal ways that it would have happened just naturally aren't happening. And so sometimes it's walking alongside of them through that grief process, letting them know it's okay to grieve, and then helping them remember, hey, don't forget to do this week to connect with those people.
I think when we experience loss, especially those things where we didn't expect to lose, I think we tend to go in. We go when we get that loss,
especially because we're supposed to be able to do it. We're supposed to know what to do.
Or you're supposed to. And I
should.
think people are really hard on themselves because they almost feel like they've been used, like they're the chump that just got taken advantage of because they suffered a loss. And so we go in, and so we love it when people come and meet with us, because we want to encourage them bringing it out. So to get it in the light, I think it's really powerful to see how people with God's help can deal with things that are put in the light.
And that's
not the natural way to move.
Right, but that's catharsis. That is a purging.
Good word.
Thank you. I learned it in grad school, right? It's cathartic. It's a cathartic experience when you are able to process that with someone else, especially in person.
And when that happens in friendships, so often that happens. Andy and I have been friends since I was 19, and so there's
and I was
times
21.
Is that why you have that twitch?
But there's times even through the last couple of months, just some of the stuff that Susan and I have gone through, where I can sit with Andy and talk at a level because of relationship and being able to have that conversation. And I've done it with them on video call and in person when I was able to, but just being able to sometimes articulate it. Sometimes I know in my own life when I start to talk about it with somebody and actually start to lay it out there, suddenly it becomes clearer to me.
Right.
Well, and there's an emotional component to that, right?
Right.
So
Very much
because
so.
emotions impact us physically, right? And so when we do process with someone else what's going on in our life, and there's an emotional component to it, that again is part of that cathartic experience. So it's not just talking about the experience, but it's also emoting with someone else that then is reciprocally responding to us, right? And you have that give and take in relationship. And so when everything shut down, a lot of us weren't having that reciprocal interaction with people. And we didn't even know we were missing it. Right?
One of the things, and you guys know this, one of the biggest challenges that you have in kind of classic recovery ministries is moving to that place of coming out of denial, of really of being able to bring those things into the light. One of the big scriptures that we use is 1 John. When we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with God and one another. We have forgiveness of sins. And that's one of the things, one of the phenomena that I'm observing in this season is the folks that are part of our Celebrate Recovery or recovery ministries that are used to making that decision to press in, have pressed in, and there's connection going on, and there's relationships. Those are still going on. Our challenge is, what I see our challenge is to communicate that to a wider church body that maybe hasn't had to walk that walk yet, and yet it's vitally important in this time to press into relationships, to accountability, to pressing through the emotional kind of barriers that exist in seeking out relationships and seeking out those kind of things. That's our challenge, and I don't know like how you guys are counseling folks to kind of break through that wall or that barrier.
Well, that's a big part of it, and Rick, you might be able to speak to this more, but the Greek word for life is zoe, I believe, and there's a word picture. It's movement, it's rushing water, and so to have that movement, even if you feel isolated, to at least get going. So when you mentioned that catharsis, I think to reach out and even just to call somebody or just to break that pattern. And so we really try to do a comprehensive view, more of a systems view of people, kind of a bio, psycho, social, spiritual. We're all parts of those.
John, could you say that word again?
Bio, psycho, social, spiritual.
Unpack that a little bit.
So
That sounds like an hour right there.
Your biology and your psychology and your emotions, your spiritual health, your physical health. It's all intertwined. We're fearfully and wonderfully made by God, and so to have that movement and to try to cover each part of our person that way. So even just studies with people who experience depression or more chronic depressive episodes, just the serotonin reuptake from strenuous physical activity can help somebody's emotions and help your whole person. And so we really try to advocate a lot of balance as people move out, especially through times like this. We just need to try to get going.
And that goes back to what you were asking, when someone's experiencing that depth of loneliness, right? Kind of a darkness.
Or even anxiety.
Right? So it's not just, super important, make sure you're being creative in how you connect with others, and we've all had to figure that out over the last few months, but then having balance in these other areas. So what kind of sleep are you getting? And what are you putting into your body? And what kind of exercise and activity are you getting? Because again, some of that has been taken away from us too, and that's been a loss for some people. And then what are we reading? What are we watching? What are we paying attention to? What are we putting in our minds? Right? The cognition, the emotion, all of that, and then spiritual. Right? Where are we getting spiritually fed? So the biopsychosocial spiritual model and looking at it systemically so there's balance is really important.
Yeah, I think so often when someone comes in and they're in crisis mode, I'm often saying, get to sleep,
Yeah.
eat some healthy food.
We ask those questions all the time.
What do you do?
Right. Hey,
what do you
when's the
do
last
for
time you slept?
activity? Do you
Yeah.
run? Do you jog? Do you, what are you doing? And make sure you're staying active. And I know just it's been a week since my mom passed, and I think for the first time since our first child was born, we had some meals delivered from the church back then. And this week, I remember I think somebody in our office just said, we're going to arrange meals, and I thought that's really weird.
It seems weird now.
I'm the pastor. I make sure this gets done for other people, and somebody just told me just accept it and say thank you, and that was hard for me to do. I'm usually on this giving, make sure everything's all taken care of. Someone's grieving, let's make sure we're there. And what's been so interesting is it's a huge thing for us not to have like a plan, but I also realize that in a middle, like the kind of week I've had, sort of in this bubble of grief with family, somebody goes, we need to eat. Like you actually can almost forget.
Yeah.
And the rhythm of someone just bringing food and forcing you to sit down and eat and realize life goes on is so powerful. And so sometimes with all of our routines being upset, many of us being in our homes for months, and you're working or you're trying to do everything in one spot, we can easily start to leave out certain spots that are really important for us.
Not even realize it until a few days go by, and then you're like, whoa, this seems strange.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of movement can get something started.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm going to borrow another term from physics, right? Inertia is a term I talk to clients about a lot, because once you start that movement, inertia, that sense of inertia can be a part of the process as well.
Right. Talk to me a little bit about relational health. Man, I would just say as a pastor, this season has been so challenging. I've had a number of late night texts or Facebook messages going, we're struggling. He's packing. I don't know if he's coming back. And so much of this has been really because of these kinds of challenges and changes, and it's enough once in a while for our own baggage and our own stuff. And I always say, just add one more person in a relationship, and sometimes we have enough baggage to sink a ship. And so, talk to me just a little bit about marriages or parenting and just home relational things. Maybe even some break that down. What are some of the unique challenges at this time, and then what are some of the things that we can start moving towards?
Dr. Branton and I talked about this a little bit last week when we met. The things that those small things that have kind of always been there that don't necessarily get addressed because everybody's busy logistically, tend to be amplified relationally when you're together that much.
Yeah,
So
especially if you have a teenage daughter.
That's right. And a dog. But so some of those things that could have been worked on that have been put off relationally can just be that much more highlighted and a little more intense, being kind of put together. So we've noticed a lot of systems, those things that could have been addressed earlier they're really wanting to address them now.
Right, they're
so
exacerbated
powerful,
now because of the external stress that has been put upon those family systems that have to be in that house all the time together now, where, like you were saying, before we had all these different busy activities that were maybe distracting us from some of those things that we maybe should have been paying attention to. Now we have to pay attention to them, and it's a different context.
So how do you counsel, or how do you help folks approach addressing those things with that in mind, that they are maybe some latent kind of issues that have just been kind of under the surface, but now because of proximity at 24 hours, you're how do you counsel people to walk through those?
Well, I listen to some of what they're going to share with us is going to be common shared experiences. So I look for the commonality so we can empathize with one another, which I'll come back to in one second. But then there's always a uniqueness to their story and their situation. So we listen very carefully to their unique circumstances, right? But when we can find commonality, we look for that because empathy is what I call the glue of relationships. And so when there's been hurt or someone's offended or there's broken trust or whatever it is, and I think families have experienced this internally more because we've been together more, if we're not remembering who that person is, and we're not remembering they're for us, they're not against us, and we're not giving that empathy, because again, empathy, if I know someone does want to hear my story, they want to know my experience, I'm going to be more willing to reciprocate as well. And so a lot of the blow-ups, the explosions, if we're remembering, again, my wife, when we were first married, she's has her master's in social work. I think she's a better counselor than me, but yeah, he agrees. So, but we would get into an argument, right? First year of marriage, kind of a tough year. But I remember her coming back. I would shut down, go watch ESPN or something. She would come back and say two things to me. And whenever she said it, I knew I needed to respond. She got me, right?
Yeah.
But she said, help me make it better now. So she's asking me to join in that process.
Right.
Help me make it better now. And please remember, I have good intent toward you. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Same
but
team.
and then all of a sudden we can give each other a little bit more grace and we can give each other a little bit more empathy.
I think so
sometimes
often
people don't listen too.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we lately have realized how well do we really listen,
Yeah.
and then what's really happening here? Do we really care? Can we move ourselves to care? So it takes curiosity
John,
to get to the
you've done a lot of work with our teams and stuff over the
Oh, yeah.
years, and there's stuff that you've said that's sticking in my head, and one of them is when Susan might say, well, you made me feel this, or when you say that, it makes me feel this. And I remember I used to just sort of like go, well, you're wrong. That's not what I was doing, But I love one of the things you said once is now I actually will look at her and go, I would have, I never wanted to make you feel, unvalued. I felt that before, and it doesn't feel good. There's that understanding and realizing that we do affect each other in negative ways unintentionally, and when that other person communicates that to be able to acknowledge that.
That's what Ray was saying. So with the empathy, if you can start with curiosity and just be really curious about what's not only going on for you, but what's going on for the other person. Even if you guess wrong, you're at least attempting to guess. And I'm not big on mind reading. I go, oh, you just meant to do that to hurt me, Not mind reading, but just curiosity. How could you possibly be feeling? What could you be feeling? And have I ever felt that too? So I'm glad you remembered that, because Susan wants you to care.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing you said quite often, I think sort of ties into that too, is feelings. We all have them. What are you going to do with those feelings, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we're just shocked that we have certain feelings. It's really, what are you going to do with that? Right?
Well, and I'll jump in on that. Sometimes we're naming a feeling, but it's the
It's
wrong
not a feeling.
name. Well, it's not a feeling. It might be a belief or a thought.
Yeah.
But also the feeling might be oversimplified. There might be a dozen different emotions going on, and we just go to, I'm angry.
Yeah.
Well, that maybe, but that's maybe the secondary emotion. What's underneath that?
Right.
There's some sort of pain. There's hurt.
Yeah.
Right? There's woundedness of something, and we got to figure out what those other emotions are.
Devalued, unloved, rejected, abandoned, unappreciated, unaccepted. I mean, there are a bunch. And so what we try to do is help people recognize those. And what are they called? Like even when we were talking about anxiety, underneath that there's powerless, there's helpless, there's unworthy, perhaps. There are lots of things in there. So
and recently, for a lot of people, there's been hope has disappeared. Right. And so, figuring out how to restore some of that hope is so important.
I had a senior tell me just a couple of days ago, and she said, I feel so close to the end of my life, and I feel like I'm wasting my life right now with just being shut in, not being able to attend my church, not being able to have the game days that I normally had, not having family come and visit. And I feel like life, the sand's going through the hourglass, and this is our reality. And I think that's somewhat we all feel a bit. So just talk to me just a little bit about, how do we find that significance in moments when we are missing all of these different elements and our significance of life?
Well, the first thing I think about is just going to the Lord. Obviously, I know that sounds cliche, but like King David, Lord, search my heart and know me, know my anxious ways. To really dig in there and find it first. Yeah. And then really, like we said before, start moving out a little bit. Yeah.
And it depends what we're focusing on too, right? And this is why it is so important to make sure we're allowing others to know what we're experiencing so they can give us some input as well. And have those select few trusted individuals that we're letting speak into our lives, because we may be telling ourselves things that aren't true or that are distorted, and that's then feeding into that hopelessness, that's feeding into that malaise that we've, that blah feeling that we've maybe all experienced a little bit lately. So sometimes someone's going to tell us something that reminds us there is hope. There is hope in Christ. There is hope that things will change. Things rarely are permanent. They're almost always temporary. We're going to keep moving forward. And if we have an understanding that we're going to keep moving forward together, and I've got people walking alongside of me, that hope then gets restored a little bit.
I had an elderly client last week, and I don't know, it just came to me because she was ruminating on what she doesn't have. And so I just asked her to bring in a bunch of pictures. Bring me a bunch of pictures. And she brought in a bunch of old pictures from her life and her family. And she said, oh, yeah, I forgot about this one and I forgot about that. And her countenance just changed. And to start hoping again that she could keep building new pictures. And so to see those pictures and then to build new ones in your head is so powerful. So.
Well, and we are at a point that we have to navigate to a new future, don't we? So often we look at
it's a new normal.
I like to go back to January, February, or go back to 2019, and we all know that that's not reality, right? There's a new future ahead of us that will be reimagined and rethought out. And talk to me a little bit about as we're seeing statistics as pastors, we're being shot stuff that I've not verified facts, but just an increased use of sort of self-medicating, anything from alcohol to drugs to pornography. In moments like this where stress is high, rhythms are upset, lack of connection, and have you guys experienced that somewhat? Just talk to us about we've got a number of people that have had great victory in their life before this, and now again are challenged because there's triggers that are sort of going on. So talk to us a little bit about sort of self-medicating and addiction and reoccurrence of those kinds of things.
Well, it's inevitable. I mean, that is going to happen, and we are, I think, going to see, especially as we keep moving through this time, we're going to see people coming in. We're going to get more referrals for those types of things. It's also inevitable that if there are things that haven't been truly addressed to the level they need to be addressed, they're going to be exacerbated, and we're going to fall back into old patterns. All right. So again, it's so important, and you can speak to this too. It's so important to be sharing and letting somebody in on that, because if we know somebody knows, we're going to be less likely to go back to some of those vices. If we know somebody knows, we're going to have some accountability. If we know someone's going to check in on us and they do care about us, right? But we have to let them know what's going on first in here and in here, right? So, but yes, we're going to see that where there is an increase. We're going to see all sorts of statistics after this where that aren't going to be pleasant. And that's why we do what we do, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, I think, the function of that is I think when people start feeling things, and like we've been talking about, lots of stuff happens in here, and if you're more isolated, you're more closed, then you try to self-soothe, and I think we've all done it. I mean,
Right.
Grab that pizza and go for it, it's...
And it's easier.
Yeah.
It's easier.
And it's easier to Ray's point, it's easier in isolation too in some ways,
Right.
Yeah.
because you don't have that accountability and you can
Yeah.
get a little more closed, and that's
Yeah.
what we've been seeing.
Yeah.
And so I think, and because life's gotten a little more simplified, I think some of the simple pleasures we are leaning on even more. Hey, when's lunch, or man, I can't wait to open that bottle of wine, and
Yeah,
we're
right.
looking forward to these things that are very easily, obtained.
Right.
So,
That's big
and it's not, it's for all of us, right?
Right.
We know ourselves.
Right.
We all have those
Right.
things we're going to fall back into if we're not careful. And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, when we're working with people, and we got to apply it to ourselves too,
Mm-hmm.
we're emphasizing have structure, have a plan. Make sure you're if you have kids, there's a schedule. Stick to the schedule as best as you can. Right? Make sure you're touching base with others. Make sure you have that structure and that plan, because you're gonna be less likely to go back to some of those things that are too
Right.
easy
Right.
if you're following through with what you know is good and healthy, right? And other people know that that's what you're doing.
Good.
One of the things that we're very excited that we even started this conversation, and it's interesting that we had planned this event when it was just really a conversation about how coronavirus has changed our world, and we all know what's happened even since then, and the conversations that we have as a pastoral team. It's very important that the folks in our congregation hear from us that we're walking through the same kind of stuff. We're walking through the same kind of angers or anxieties, or just maybe even tendencies to isolate. All of the things that we're talking about, we experience those. It's not that a certain class of people skates through this, and so I love the fact that we're having this conversation, and we can talk about maybe keeping one another accountable to some healthy schedules and to healthy routines, or get back to some healthy routines, and those kind of things that as a church body, those are the kind of conversations that we need to be having with one another in this time, and not to avoid those, because sometimes we can get into this. Well, I'm not gonna press in like that. We in recovery, we know that we do have permission to press in with one another, and that may not be a natural tendency just in the church body in general. But if people hear anything tonight, this is the time where we need to ask those questions. We need to press into one another's lives. And when we ask, like, how are you doing, we really do want to know, how are you doing, and what are you doing to again talk about instilling normalcy or normalize what's going on, because it's just the external circumstances are getting worse, and they're more anxiety producing. So our job even gets more important, to press into those, or press through those things, and kind of touch those.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think it's our job as a community.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a few households together, whether it is the church community or the broader community, we have to be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And because there is confusion, there is anxiety with everything else that's going on.
Yep.
And I like John's word that he used earlier. We need to be curious about those things.
Right.
And we need to ask people what their experiences have been, and we need to ask people that don't look like us to tell us their story, so we can learn and we can better understand. And I think that's a call to action for all of us at this time.
Yeah, it really is. If you haven't yet, you're able to on the chat part of YouTube, you're able to send in some questions. So if you have questions, Andy will actually get them right here and sort of tee them up for us. So feel free to submit some questions if you're watching. While those are coming in, I know we have some parents that have young kids. There's one family I'm thinking of, and I think their first little girl was just months old in March, and now a few months later have been in this one-bedroom apartment, mom, dad, baby, so grandparents are involved. Other people haven't been that involved, and we got some parents that are really concerned about their kids having some separation anxiety as they bring them back to church or bring them to school or even visit family. Some of them are saying, I don't know how my kids are going to react. It's just been us and no more. So talk to us a little bit about some of our young parents that are facing that.
Well, first, there's just the fear of getting sick, and that seems, I thought about it the other day too. We still are seeing clients in offices, and to have that level, to think, well, what could happen to me, or what could happen to my family, what could happen to my baby. So on top of that is what you shared, that just socially too, there's maybe an impact. So I think as parents work to at least start attempting to move out, even in that situation with a baby that hasn't been out, they're going to have to travel through the discomfort and travel through the screaming and the gnashing of teeth. But I think when what you're talking about, separation anxiety is what we call it, and maybe kids that young would need to refuel. We call it refueling, to get moms. They only get so far away, and they need to refuel. I think for parents of young kids, the best message is that, hey, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm in this with you, and we're going to try some stuff. So to really just to be there, and then in that process, just to be alongside and try some new things.
Well, and you got to be as creative as possible to expose your younger children to some other things. And so, again, we're all figuring this out together. But there is a lot of literature on attachment theory that if someone's interested in reading more about this, that's the field I would say, grab a book on attachment theory. But because there's going to be secure attachment, where the child feels a little bit better about getting a little further away from mom and dad, and then there's the insecure attachments and the separation anxiety. And because of what we all just went through, if you have a very young child, please normalize it at first. Right? And remember that the child doesn't have an adult brain, the child has a kid brain. Right? So of course they're not understanding this the same way we're understanding it. When we know it's safe, but they don't know it's safe. But what we model to them in that moment is huge, because they're going to mirror back what we model to them. So if we get angry or we get scared or and they're picking up on that from us, then that's going to reinforce that insecure attachment, right? So again, that's a lot bigger conversation. But talk to somebody you trust about it. Talk to someone that's going through it as well. Talk to someone you think knows a little bit about it. Seek out some professional advice, and then be creative and experiment, like John said.
Creativity is big, and then we get to spend a lot of time with Ray's family and the kids and stuff too, even when they were a lot younger. And Ray always said a good thing. Yeah, it's all right. Ray always said a good thing. Prepare them for change. And I think that's really important too. So if you're doing the secure attachment and it's safe, then it's not chaotic. You prepare them for change, and it goes way better that way. So.
Raymond, you've got teenagers. So what's that like been through this? Because I'm sure school stops and home and teenagers are just by and large social beings and constant interaction. And what have you experienced a bit?
Well, and I'll emphasize, even if someone's more introverted, right? It's still impacted their world, right? So whether you're extroverted or introverted, not right or wrong, bad or good, it still has impacted your world, right? So, we have a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So, our kids are connecting with each other in ways that aren't familiar to us in our generation. So,
Like what? Give me an example of that.
well, all the social media, the different apps that they have, where they're, where they have to teach us about it, right?
Right.
And by the way, important for us to learn about it so that we're monitoring things, right? Really important. Again, another conversation, but I still think, even though they are already more adept at that. A connection to their peers online through technology, it's still been hard, right? Our oldest daughter, our 15-year-old, is a tennis player. She loves playing tennis. This was a loss for her for a couple months, where she wasn't able to practice. She wasn't able to go to her lessons. She wasn't able to go out and play. And we saw that impact her, right? Her countenance, her mood. And so just recognizing all the different things, even though they're still able to connect in different ways, the in-person connection, the activities that teenagers would normally be having aren't there. And we have to remember that as parents. So we are empathizing with them as well, and talking to them about, we do understand some of this, and then again getting creative as well as monitoring how they still are connecting with their peers.
Good.
So I want to kind of come back to a little bit of that, just talking about the grief stages, because that's a very interesting topic. If I hear you correctly, the losses that we're going through, loss of being able to play tennis, loss of taking part in a celebration, the losses that are you saying that the stages of grief, that obviously every one of us has experienced losses, so we're all going through the stages of grief very similar to actually having lost a loved one? I mean, is to that depth, or talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, again, I would say there's a commonality, but then there's also a uniqueness. So we got to remember that my experience of loss about the same thing is not going to be someone else's experience of loss of that same thing. There could be, it might be prioritized different in their life. And so I got to respect that, and try to understand that. So, but and the stages of grief, by the way, we could go into that, but it's not just a linear equation. Okay, I'm gonna have some shock first, and then I'll be done with that stage, and then I'm gonna feel depressed, and then I'll be done with that stage, and then I'll try to make some deals with God, and but it's more, it's more fluid. Thank you. It's not so linear. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's important to realize that someone else might experience something differently, even if we've had that common loss, it might be felt differently by someone else.
And then people tend to minimize too. Well, I went through that back in 1995, and all you got to do is just make popcorn every night, or whatever. And
like
sometimes people can tend to minimize. And I think to your point, it's better to just really examine.
And we may be minimizing that sometimes for our kids and our teenagers and not realize it.
So, and the reason I say that is because I think that again, to recognize the kind of the almost universal grief that's going on, and a lot of times you go, well, me losing out on a commencement ceremony, that's not like Rick's grief that he's going through losing his mom. We tend to compare those things, but really understanding that everybody that sits here, everybody that's watching us, is walking through grief of some kind, and just to have, I love the phrase that you said earlier about giving more grace to each other, and I think that's something that should really reverberate in our heads and in our hearts and in our message as we walk through this. I love that, and that's going to be my takeaway from tonight.
Which we all might have a similar takeaway from this time, these last few months. A similar takeaway is that we have a commonality in that we've all experienced some things we never thought we would. At times we never thought we would, and that it's loss, it's grief, and it's kind of a common
Yeah.
experience, and it may be better for us in the future in some ways to be quickened to,
Yeah.
this is how it feels.
Yeah.
Well, and let's not minimize that either,
Yeah.
because again, we don't grow or develop unless we go through hard things.
Right.
And again, you've heard it over and over from us. Make sure when we go through hard things, you have people walking beside
With
you
you,
as
yeah.
you go through those hard things.
Yeah.
I want to go all the way back to the beginning when we were talking about anxiety, and John brought up the word curiosity earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I'm working with someone and they're having this anxiety of all the loss and the grief and everything that's changed, that's one of the words that I like to use a lot. You know, I'm anxious about this. Hey, let's replace that word for a minute. I'm curious about this.
Yeah.
Because it changes the focus.
Yeah.
It changes
That's good.
the woe is me into, okay,
Let's find out.
let's be interested and let's figure it out and
Yeah,
let's
love
be
that.
creative. So I think that's a great word to use.
Yeah.
But it is important to remember that universal experience
Yeah.
that we're having together, whether it's with COVID or whether it's with everything else that's happened recently.
Yeah.
There's a commonality. There's of confusion. There's a commonality of fear. There's a commonality of anxiety, and let's talk about it, and let's give each other grace as we go through it.
Well, I know as we look at the rest of 2020, we know that we're months away from really vaccines and those kinds of things. We've got a very divided political landscape right now with an election year. We have our brothers and sisters, people of color, that are just voicing the injustice and inequality, and that we're seeing all of this. There's no June 30th or September 1. Sometimes in our minds we like to think, well, by then things will be.
Right.
But sometimes we have these moments where we look forward and we see all of these things coming, and we can almost romanticize, before COVID, we can sometimes romanticize these times before. I just wanted to go back to the way it was. But so here we are. We've got a lot of things coming at us yet this year, and some challenges.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah. We were laughing before about Back to the Future. I think there was a reference before, and I said, well, whatever you do, don't set it to 2020. Don't travel to 2020. But there are some incredible opportunities for us in the midst of these challenging times. That's what I keep hearing us,
Yeah.
right? Where there's challenges in all these areas, but there's incredible opportunities for families
Right.
to connect. Susan and I have cooked more meals in the last 3 months in this home than we did for all the years we were there. We just usually running out.
Yeah.
There's
I've
things-
walked more miles with my wife than I would have ever imagined I would walk.
Yeah. It
And
normally-
when all the busyness of the tennis lessons and everything else stopped, right? For a month straight, we had dinner on the patio as a family, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm going to look back on and cherish.
Good.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think the hope is restored when we're embracing the process. I don't think the
Right.
hope is restored when we have an end date.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and in doing so, remembering that we're doing it together.
Yeah, so the hope isn't getting out of it. The hope is just embracing this, seeing what God's going to do through this. I mean, I think for us as a church, that for how many years we said, well, the church isn't a building. Man, has that been tested, right?
Right.
Can we be the church without gathering here? And we found out the answer is yes. We put that to a test. That I think as a congregation, we're more convinced we need each other than we've ever been convinced.
Right.
That what we do is important. What God calls us to do in the community is important. And so this is an incredible time for us as a community of faith, but then in our families, being creative in all different areas of our finances, our physical health, and those things. So there are opportunities at this moment.
There's also a great, at least mental picture, and our pastor at Scottsdale Bible, Jamie Rasmussen, had mentioned that this weekend that we're all made in the image of God, all of us, and we have that commonality, and we get to do today, you know, and we can concentrate on loving what God loves,
Yeah.
His people.
Yeah.
And by doing that each day, we just don't know what it's going to look like, but we know that if we do that today, tomorrow's got a great chance.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And just faithfulness, right?
yeah.
Faithfulness at this moment, faithfulness to God and in our relationships, and faithfulness in our careers in this kind of a moment. And so what faithfulness looks like for us is so important right now.
Well, and we help restore in our relationships. We help restore that faithfulness,
Yeah.
right, in
Yeah.
one another,
Yeah.
right, as we're investing in those relationships in all these creative ways.
Yeah, yeah, so good, so good. Well, I just I want to thank you guys for not only coming tonight, and I'm so glad that there's so many folks from VIA that are seeing your faces for the first time, maybe, and don't always know of our partnership with PCA. And but thank you for what you do. Thanks for being there for us as a congregation, for our people. There are people at VIA that have seen members of their team, and today their marriages are strong and intact, having gone through some crazy things. And today they know that good, wise counsel in difficult moments can help them navigate sort of uncharted waters. And so thank you for what you guys do. And I just want to really encourage you, if you're watching and there are areas of your life that you're just struggling, maybe marriage times, this is just a tumultuous time, let me encourage you not only to reach out to one of your pastors, reach out to us, that's what we're here to do, but also going to professional counseling associates and finding one of these individuals that they love the Lord, they're going to encourage you in your faith, they're going to honor your faith, but they can put tools in your belt that can really be used at difficult, trying moments like this. And so let me encourage you to take that step. And I think a takeaway I'm leaving with tonight is just just it's all connected. Our physical well-being, our mental health, our spiritual health, our relational health. We're whole people, and that's the way God's created us. And I think with all these challenging times is all of those routines that sort of are fit together in life are being challenged right now. And it's a time where we really should, with a trusted friend, talk about these things and walk together with one another. Any last challenge?
Well,
that
we
you
love
have?
having you guys too. It's been great over the years to get to do life with you all and so many folks from the church.
Yeah.
And we're just honored to have you on our team. So we appreciate
Thanks
you.
for the invitation to be part of the process. We love being partnered with VIA.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's just pray together, could we? And just ask the Lord to take the things that we've been thinking about as these conversations are going on, and that the Lord would give us strength and courage as we approach some of the challenging things that each of us are going through, and then how we do that together as a community. Okay. So, Father, we thank you for this time. We've sensed that you're here, you're among us. I think of just the first part of James that tells us to consider it joy when we encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of our faith produces endurance, and that endurance can have its perfect work on our heart, that we can be full and complete, lacking in nothing. I also think just the verses right after that, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who freely gives it. God, so often in my life, you've given me wisdom through the counsel, sometimes of a professional counselor, sometimes a good friend, sometimes listening to a sermon or being in a Bible study or reading a book. You've brought counsel to my life, and you've brought wisdom to my life. So, Father, as a congregation right now, we just bless Dr. Branton and Dr. Michaels, and we just, and all of their team and professional counseling associates, bless them for what they do. And such a vital part of the kingdom here in the valley, and we just pray, Lord, give them strength. Lord, for us as a congregation, as your people, may we realize we're not alone. That you're with us, but Lord, we're also in this together, and help us to lean upon each other in incredible ways. I know just how much our conversation has changed over time, where we were trying to convince people the need for community, and now it's right before us. We all see it and feel it. And so I pray we'd press into this, and Lord, as a community of faith, we'd come out of this just with an incredible gratitude for pulling us together in a special place like Via Church. So Father, now this week, I pray that you would fill us with the power of your Spirit. May your word dwell in us richly. May you cause us to be a blessing wherever we go, to bless others. We pray this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks again, guys, and thank you, Via. Thanks for tuning in. And this will be able to be viewed again. And so if you enjoyed this and want to reference this with someone else, make sure you recommend it to them. Good night. Have a great week.